In the unforgiving frontier of 1876, a lone cowboy's simple act of kindness sparked an alliance that would change the course of history. When Jack Monroe shared his last meal with a starving child, he had no idea that sunrise would bring 150 Cheyenne warriors to his doorstep, not for revenge, but for something far more unexpected. This is a story of honor, sacrifice, and how one moment of humanity bridged two worlds at war. What happened next defied everything the Wild West stood for. The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly before Jack Monroe as his weary horse trudged through the dusty plains, each step kicking up small clouds that hung in the still evening air. Jack was a man hardened by the frontier, 32 years old, with sun-weathered skin, calloused hands, and eyes that had seen too much death for one lifetime. He'd spent the last 5 years drifting from ranch to ranch, taking whatever work he could find, trying to outrun memories of the war that still haunted his dreams. His saddlebags carried little more than a bedroll, a dented tin cup, some dried meat, and half a loaf of stale bread, everything he owned in this world. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, when Jack spotted the trading post ahead. It was a ramshackle structure of weathered wood and hope, standing defiantly against the wilderness that threatened to swallow it whole. He'd been riding for 2 days straight, and his supplies were nearly exhausted. The trading post meant civilization, however rough, and maybe a warm meal if he could spare the coins. As Jack approached, something caught his eye near the corner of the building. A small figure huddled against the wall, barely moving. At first, he thought it might be a discarded bundle of rags, but then he saw the slight rise and fall of breathing. Drawing closer, Jack dismounted and discovered a child, no more than 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair and bronze skin, wearing tattered clothes that hung loosely on a frame that spoke of prolonged hunger. The child's eyes were closed, lips cracked and dry, and Jack could count the ribs through the thin fabric of the shirt. Jack's heart, despite years of building walls around it, cracked at the sight. He'd seen plenty of suffering on the frontier. It was as common as sagebrush, but something about this child's silent suffering struck him differently. He knelt down, his knees protesting after hours in the saddle, and gently touched the child's shoulder. The eyes that opened were dark and deep, filled with a weariness that no child should know, and there was no fear in them, only resignation, as if the child had already accepted whatever fate had in store. Without thinking, without considering the complications or the tensions between settlers and the indigenous peoples that ran through these territories like an electric current, Jack reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his remaining provisions. The dried meat and bread weren't much, but they represented his next 2 days of travel. He broke the bread carefully, offering half to the child along with his water canteen. The child's thin fingers trembled as they reached for the food, and Jack saw tears begin to stream down the dusty cheeks as small bites were taken slowly, carefully, as if each morsel might be the last. The trading post owner, a grizzled man named Hutchins, stepped outside and spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Best not get involved with that one, Monroe," he warned, his voice carrying the hard edge of someone who'd learned to survive by minding his own business. "That's a Cheyenne kid. Probably wandered off from one of the camps up north." Stirring up sympathy for them, Indians ain't gonna make you popular around here, especially not after what happened down at Willow Creek last month. Jack didn't respond, didn't even look up. He just sat there in the dust beside the child, watching his color slowly return to the small face, as life rekindled in those ancient young eyes. As darkness fell over the Wyoming plains, Jack made a decision that surprised even himself. He set up his bedroll against the wall of the trading post, near where the child sat, now with a belly finally feeling the comfort of food. He didn't know if the child understood English, and the child didn't speak, but somehow words seemed unnecessary. The vast sky above them filled with stars, countless and indifferent to the small dramas playing out below, And Jack Monroe fell asleep wondering what tomorrow would bring, unaware that his simple act of compassion had been witnessed by eyes hidden in the darkening hills, and that those eyes were already carrying news back to their people. Dawn broke slowly over the frontier, the sun climbing reluctantly, as if it too dreaded what the new day might bring. Jack woke to find the child gone, only a small impression in the dust, marking where the young body had rested through the night. A strange mixture of relief and disappointment washed over him, relief that he wouldn't have to figure out what to do with a lost Cheyenne child in hostile territory. Disappointment that he'd never know if his small kindness had made any lasting difference. He rolled up his bedroll, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his stomach that had nothing to do with his own hunger. Hutchins emerged from the trading post with coffee so strong it could wake the dead, handing Jack a tin cup with a knowing look. "Kid disappeared before first light," he said, settling onto a wooden bench that had seen better decades. "Probably headed back to wherever they came from." "You did what you could, Monroe." "More than most would have done." Jack sipped the bitter brew and nodded, but something felt unfinished, like a story cut off mid-sentence. He'd planned to move on that morning, head south toward Colorado, where he'd heard a ranch was hiring. But his horse had picked up a stone in its shoe and needed tending before they could travel any distance. As Jack worked on his horse's hoof, the morning air began to change. It was subtle at first, a shift in the quality of silence, the way sound travels differently when many bodies are moving through space. Hutchins noticed it too, his weathered face suddenly alert, one hand moving unconsciously toward the rifle that leaned against the doorframe. "Something's coming," he muttered, squinting toward the northern hills where the land rolled and dipped like a frozen ocean. Multiple riders, maybe more. Jack straightened, his own hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip, though he knew in his bones that if trouble was coming, one pistol wouldn't make much difference. Then he saw them emerging from the morning haze, like ghosts materializing into solid form. Riders, dozens of them, moving in a disciplined formation that spoke of warriors, not wanderers. The rising sun caught on feathers and weapons, on painted horses and proud bearing. They were Cheyenne, and they were coming straight for the trading post. Hutchins went pale, stumbling backward toward his door. "God in heaven," he whispered, his voice strangled with fear. "Monroe, get inside. Now, we've got maybe 2 minutes before." But Jack didn't move. He stood there, watching the approaching riders with a strange calm that surprised him. He'd seen cavalry charges, survived battles where men fell like wheat before a scythe, and he'd learned that running rarely improved your odds. If death was coming, he'd face it standing. The warriors formed a semicircle around the trading post, their horses stamping and snorting, dust rising from hooves to create an ethereal curtain through the morning light. Jack counted them, not 20 or 30, but well over 100, possibly 150 strong. Each warrior sat tall and ready, weapons visible but not raised, their faces painted and fierce, yet somehow not hostile. At the front of formation sat an older man, his face a map of hard years and harder decisions, eagle feathers woven into his long gray hair, and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a man's soul. The old warrior raised his hand, and absolute silence fell over the assembly. Then he dismounted with a grace that belied his years and walked forward alone, each step deliberate and measured. Jack forced himself to stand still, to keep his hand away from his gun, to breathe despite the hammering of his heart. The warrior stopped 3 paces away, and when he spoke, his English was clear and precise, learned perhaps from missionaries or traders who'd since moved on or died. "You are the one called Monroe," the warrior said, and it wasn't a question. "Last night, you fed a child who was not your own. You shared food when you had little. You showed kindness when hate would have been easier." He paused, his eyes never leaving Jack's face. "That child is my grandson. He wandered from our camp 2 days ago, drawn by hunger and the foolish hope of a young heart. We searched for him, fearing the worst, knowing how some of your people see us as less than human, as obstacles to be removed or left to die. Jack found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. I did what anyone should do. The boy was hungry. I had food. The words seemed inadequate, too simple for whatever was unfolding before him. The old warrior's eyes crinkled slightly, perhaps with the ghost of a smile. What anyone should do, yes, but most do not. Most would have walked past or worse. You stopped. You sat with him. You guarded his rest through the night. He turned then, gesturing to the assembled warriors behind him. These are my sons, my nephews, the warriors of our people. We came today not for war, but to honor a debt. You gave life to one of ours. We are here to stand with you, to offer you the protection and brotherhood of the Cheyenne Nation. The morning sun climbed higher as Hutchins watched from his doorway, jaw hanging open, unable to process what he was witnessing. Jack Monroe, a drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and fading memories, stood surrounded by 150 Cheyenne warriors who had come not to attack, but to honor him. The frontier, with all its violence and hatred, had just witnessed something that would be talked about for generations. A bridge built from one act of simple human decency, fragile as morning frost, but somehow, impossibly, strong enough to hold. The old warrior, who introduced himself as Tall Bear, invited Jack to sit with him while his warriors made camp around the trading post. What Jack had assumed would be a brief ceremony turned into something far more complex and profound. As they sat on blankets spread in the shade of the building, Tall Bear began to speak of things that would change everything Jack thought he understood about the world he'd been living in. 3 moons ago, Tall Bear began, his voice carrying the weight of history, soldiers came to our winter camp. They said we had violated the treaty, that we'd been hunting on land that was no longer ours, though it had belonged to our people since before the stars changed their positions in the sky. They burned our supplies, took our horses, and told us we had 1 week to move to the reservation or face extermination. He paused, and Jack could see the pain etched in every line of the old man's face. We are the last free band of Cheyenne in this territory. If we go to the reservation, we die slowly. If we fight, we die quickly. Either way, our people face the end of days. Jack listened, uncomfortable with the truth being laid before him. He'd heard the stories everyone had about how the indigenous peoples were being moved, relocated, confined. He'd told himself it was progress, the inevitable march of civilization. But sitting here with this dignified old man who had come to honor him, those justifications felt hollow as empty promises. What does this have to do with me? Jack asked quietly, though part of him already knew the answer. Tall Bear's eyes sharpened. Yesterday, soldiers rode past our camp, heading south. I sent scouts to follow them. They are going to Fort Russell to gather more troops, to return with enough force to drive us onto the reservation or destroy us entirely. They will be back in 4 days, maybe 5. He leaned forward, and Jack could smell the sage and smoke that clung to his clothes. My grandson wandered toward their path. If those soldiers had found him instead of you, they would have used him as evidence that we are still roaming freely, threatening settlers. It would have given them justification to attack immediately, without warning. Your kindness did not just save one child. It saved our entire band, gave us time we desperately needed. The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. His simple act of feeding a hungry child had altered the course of events in ways he couldn't have imagined. But Tall Bear wasn't finished. I came here with my warriors to honor you, yes, but also to ask something that has no right to be asked. We need help, Monroe. We need someone who can speak to the soldiers in a way they will hear, someone who can buy us time or perhaps negotiate a different path. You are white. You are a former soldier. I can see it in the way you stand, the way you assess danger. They will listen to you in ways they never will to us. Jack felt the trap closing around him, though it was a trap baited with honor and desperation rather than malice. "I'm nobody," he protested. "I'm a drifter, a ranch hand. I don't have influence with the army. Hell, they'd probably laugh me out of the fort if I even tried." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. He'd served under Colonel Brentwood during the war, and he'd heard that Brentwood was now commanding at Fort Russell. They'd parted on good terms, as much as anyone could after watching friends die in senseless charges. Maybe, just maybe, the colonel would at least hear him out. Tall Bear seemed to read his thoughts. "You have more power than you know, Jack Monroe. A man who acts from conscience rather than advantage, who feeds a hungry child when he himself is hungry. That man carries moral authority that no rank or wealth can provide. Will you help us? Will you stand with the people whose son you saved?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds, pregnant with consequences that would ripple far beyond this dusty trading post. Before Jack could answer, a commotion arose from the edge of the encampment. 3 riders were approaching from the east, and even from a distance, Jack could see they were settlers' ranchers, probably, from one of the spreads that dotted the territory. As they drew closer, Jack recognized Tom Brennan, a hard man who owned a large cattle operation and had a reputation for dealing harshly with anyone who threatened his interests, indigenous or otherwise. Brennan and his 2 hands reined in their horses just outside the circle of warriors, their faces showing a mixture of fear and anger as they took in the scene. "What in the hell is going on here?" Brennan demanded, his hand resting on the rifle in his saddle holster. "Hutchins, you got 150 hostiles camped at your door, and you're serving them tea." His eyes found Jack, and recognition brought a sneer to his weathered face. "Monroe, might have known you'd be in the middle of this." Always were soft when it came to the Redskins. Jack stood slowly, feeling the weight of all the eyes upon him, Brennan's hostile glare, Tall Bear's hopeful gaze, the silent question in the eyes of 150 warriors who had come to honor a stranger. "These men are my guests," Jack heard himself say, and with those words, he crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "They came in peace, and they'll leave in peace. No trouble unless someone starts it." Brennan's face darkened like a thundercloud. "You better think carefully about whose side you're on, Monroe. The army's coming back through here in less than a week, and they are not gone not look kindly on anyone fraternizing with savages who should be on the reservation. You're making a mistake that could cost you everything." Jack met his gaze steadily, surprised by the calm he felt even as his entire future balanced on this moment. "Then I guess I'm making a mistake," he said quietly. "But it's mine to make." As Brennan wheeled his horse around and thundered away with his men, Jack turned back to Tall Bear and saw something like pride in the old warrior's eyes. The die was cast. There was no going back now. Whatever came next, Jack Monroe had chosen his side, and 150 Cheyenne warriors had witnessed his choice. The next 2 days transformed Jack's understanding of everything he thought he knew about the people he'd been taught to fear. As he remained with Tall Bear's band, camping in the hills near the trading post, he witnessed a community bound by honor, tradition, and a profound connection to the land that made his own rootless existence seem hollow by comparison. The warriors who had appeared so fierce that first morning revealed themselves as fathers and brothers, men who laughed and told stories, who worried about their families and mourned the world that was disappearing around them. Tall Bear's grandson, the child Jack had fed, was named Little Wolf. The boy had recovered his strength and followed Jack everywhere with worshipful eyes, occasionally bringing him pieces of dried meat or berries, as if repaying the debt one small offering at a time. Through Little Wolf and his mother Running Deer, who spoke some English, Jack learned that the band had been surviving on increasingly meager rations, that the buffalo were nearly gone from these territories, that the traditional hunting grounds were now fenced ranches, and that the reservation meant starvation dressed up as government charity. On the second evening, as Jack sat by the fire with Tall Bear and several elder warriors. The old man revealed the true depth of their predicament. "The commander at Fort Russell is called Colonel Brentwood," Tall Bear said, watching Jack's face carefully. "You know this name?" Jack felt his blood run cold. Of course, they knew about Brentwood. They probably knew every significant military leader in the territory. "I served under him during the war," Jack admitted. "He's a hard man, but not a cruel one. He follows orders, but sometimes finds ways to interpret them with humanity." Tall Bear nodded slowly. "This is what we hoped. Our scouts tell us Brentwood received orders to clear us from these lands by any means necessary, but that he has been slow to act. Perhaps his conscience troubles him. Perhaps he sees that we are not the enemy his superiors wish us to be." He leaned closer, the firelight casting deep shadows across his face. "If you went to him, if you spoke to him as one soldier to another, you might reach the part of him that still remembers there are different ways to win a battle. You might convince him to give us safe passage north, to Canada, where we could live free." Jack rubbed his face, exhaustion and conflict warring within him. Tall Bear, even if Brentwood wanted to help, going against direct orders would end his career, possibly land him in prison. "I can't ask a man to throw away everything he's worked for." But even as he spoke, he remembered the colonel, a man who had once refused to shoot retreating rebels in the back, who had shared his rations with starving Southern civilians after the war, who had told Jack that honor meant doing right even when it cost you everything. Running Deer approached the fire, her face troubled. "A rider came from the south," she said quietly. "My brother saw him pass on the road below. He wore the uniform of the Army Scouts. They are coming sooner than we thought. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps the day after." The news sent ripples of tension through the camp. Warriors began checking weapons, mothers gathered children closer, and the old man began singing songs that Jack didn't understand but whose melancholy needed no translation. That night, unable to sleep, Jack walked to the edge of the camp where sentries kept watch over the dark plains. One of the young warriors, no more than 16, stood alert against the star-filled sky. When Jack approached, the boy didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, but after a moment, he spoke in halting English. "My grandfather says you are different, that you see us as human. Most white men look through us, or see only demons to be destroyed." He paused, and Jack could hear the tremor in his voice. "I don't want to die. I don't want my sister to die. But we will fight because living as prisoners is not living at all." Jack felt something break inside him then, some final barrier between the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. He thought about all the people he'd failed to save during the war, all the moments when he'd followed orders that felt wrong in his gut, all the times he'd chosen survival over conscience. Here, finally, was a chance to stand for something larger than himself, even if it meant losing everything. When dawn broke over the Wyoming plains, painting the world in shades of gold and red, Jack Monroe had made his decision. He found Tall Bear already awake, preparing for the day's council. "I'll go to Fort Russell," Jack said without preamble. "I'll speak to Brentwood. I can't promise anything, but I'll try to buy you time, maybe even negotiate safe passage. But I need you to promise me something in return." Tall Bear's eyes held both hope and wariness. "Name it." Jack took a deep breath. "If this goes wrong, if the army comes and won't listen to reason, you take your people and run. Don't fight a battle you can't win. Don't let pride destroy what remains of your band. Promise me you'll choose survival over honor if it comes to that." Tall Bear was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable in the early light. Finally, he placed his hand on Jack's shoulder. "I promise to do what is best for my people. That is all any leader can promise. And Jack Monroe, thank you. Whatever happens now, know that you have shown us that not all white men are our enemies, that some still carry honor in their hearts. That is a gift beyond measure." As Jack prepared his horse for the ride to Fort Russell, 150 warriors gathered to see him off. And little Wolf pressed a small leather pouch into his hand, filled with sacred herbs for protection on his journey. Jack Monroe rode south toward an uncertain fate, carrying the hopes of a dying people on his shoulders. Fort Russell loomed against the horizon like a scar on the landscape, its wooden walls and watchtowers speaking of paranoia and power in equal measure. As Jack approached, riding slowly with his hands visible to show he meant no threat, he could see soldiers on the walls tracking his movement with rifles ready. The gates opened reluctantly, and he was immediately surrounded by a patrol that escorted him roughly through the dusty parade ground toward the commander's headquarters. Colonel Brentwood looked older than Jack remembered, his hair now almost completely gray, his face lined with the weight of decisions that offered no good choices. When Jack was shown into his office, the colonel's eyes widened in recognition, followed quickly by a hardening of expression. "Monroe, I heard you've gone aground out here, drifting from ranch to ranch. Didn't expect to see you riding back into my life." He gestured to a chair, but his hospitality was clearly strained. "I assume you're here about the Cheyenne." Word travels fast on the frontier. Jack sat, suddenly aware of how he must look trail-worn and sunbaked, more native than soldier at this point. "I'm here because I've seen something you need to see, Colonel. Those people you've been ordered to move, they're not the enemy. They're families, children, old men trying to survive in a world that's left them no room to exist." Brentwood's jaw tightened. "I don't need lectures on morality from a drifter, Monroe. I have orders. Those Cheyenne are in violation of the treaty. They need to report to the reservation. They'll die on the reservation," Jack said flatly. "You know it, and I know it. Slow death from disease and starvation, or quick death if they refuse. Either way, you'll be the man who pulled the trigger." Brentwood stood abruptly, turning to stare out the window at his fort. "You think I don't know that? You think I sleep easy at night knowing what I'm being ordered to do? But I'm a soldier, Monroe. I follow orders. That's what keeps civilization from collapsing into chaos." Jack rose too, moving to stand beside his former commander. "You once told me that honor meant doing right, even when it cost everything. You said that after you refused to shoot those retreating rebels at Cider Creek. You took a reprimand for that, nearly got court-martialed. You told me that some things were worth the cost." Brentwood's hands gripped the windowsill hard enough that his knuckles went white. "That was different. That was war. This is dot policy. This is war," Jack said intensely. "Just a different kind. And you have a choice about what kind of soldier you want to be remembered as." Before Brentwood could respond, the door burst open and a lieutenant rushed in, his face flushed with urgency. "Colonel, sir, we have a situation." Tom Brennan and about 30 armed ranchers just rode up to the gate. "They're demanding to speak with you immediately. They say they know where the Cheyenne are camped, and they prepared to take matters into their own hands if the army won't act." Brentwood cursed under his breath. This was the complication Jack had feared: civilians taking vigilante action, forcing the colonel's hand. They moved quickly to the parade ground where Brennan sat on his horse, surrounded by hard-faced men carrying rifles and pistols, their intentions written clearly in their angry expressions. "Colonel," Brennan called out, his voice carrying across the fort, "we've got 150 hostiles camped near Hutchins' trading post. They've been there 3 days now, and who knows what they're planning. We demand you take action immediately, or we will." Brentwood's face remained impassive, though Jack could see the calculation in his eyes. "Mr. Brennan, I appreciate your concerns, but military matters are not subject to civilian demands. I'll handle the situation as I see fit." Brennan's face darkened with fury. "As you see fit? Colonel, with all due respect, we don't have time for military politics. Those savages killed settlers last year. They're a threat that needs to be eliminated, not coddled." He pointed directly at Jack. "And that traitor there's been living with them, probably feeding them information about our defenses. The situation was spiraling out of control faster than Jack had anticipated. If Brennan and his vigilantes rode on Tall Bear's camp, it would be a massacre on both sides. The warriors would fight to protect their families. The ranchers would show no mercy, and any hope of a peaceful resolution would die in blood on the Wyoming plains. Jack stepped forward, his voice carrying across the parade ground. Those warriors didn't come for war. They came to honor a debt. If you attack them, you'll be starting a conflict that will engulf this entire territory. Brennan laughed harshly. Honor? From Indians? Monroe, you've gone soft in the head. The only good Indian is... He never finished the sentence. Brentwood's voice cracked like a whip. That will be enough, Mr. Brennan. I am still the commanding officer of this post, and I will not have civilians dictating military policy or spouting bloodthirsty rhetoric in my fort. He paused, and Jack could see the internal struggle playing out across the colonel's face. I will ride to the Cheyenne camp myself, with Monroe as my guide. I will assess the situation personally before any action is taken. The parade ground erupted in angry murmurs, but Brentwood silenced them with a raised hand. Furthermore, any civilian action against the Cheyenne before I return will be considered vigilantism and prosecuted accordingly. I'll have scouts watching the trails. If any of you move against that camp, you'll answer to military justice. Brennan looked like he might challenge the order, but something in Brentwood's expression made him think better of it. With a final glare at Jack, he wheeled his horse around and led his group out of the fort, leaving a wake of dust and muttered threats. As the gates closed behind them, Brentwood turned to Jack with a mixture of resignation and determination. You've put me in an impossible position, Monroe. But maybe impossible positions are where a man finds out who he really is. We ride at first light. You'd better pray your Cheyenne friends are as honorable as you claim, because if this goes wrong, we'll both be hanging from the same rope. Dawn came cold and clear as Jack and Colonel Brentwood rode north with an escort of just 10 soldiers, enough to show authority, but not so many as to suggest an attack. The colonel had insisted on a small group, saying that if they went in force, the Cheyenne would see it as aggression and respond accordingly. It was a calculated risk that could end in death for all of them. But Brentwood had chosen trust over overwhelming force, and Jack felt a surge of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could end without bloodshed. As they crested the final hill overlooking the camp, Jack's heart sank. Where 150 warriors had stood 3 days ago, now there appeared to be fewer than 50, and the camp showed signs of hasty departure. Tall Bear stood waiting at the edge of the encampment, his face grave but not hostile. When the military party approached, he raised his hand in greeting. Colonel Brentwood, I have heard of you. Your scouts say you are a man who speaks truth. Let us see if this is so. Brentwood dismounted, and after a moment's hesitation, he removed his hat, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed among the watching warriors. Where are the rest of your people? He asked directly. Tall Bear's eyes held sadness and steel in equal measure. They have gone north to Canada, traveling light and fast. They left at dawn yesterday. What remains here are the elders and warriors who volunteered to stay behind, to give our families time to reach safety. We are prepared to surrender ourselves to you so that our children might live free. The colonel looked around at the remaining Cheyenne old men who had seen countless winters, young warriors ready to die for their people's future. His face worked with emotion, and Jack saw the moment when policy collided with conscience, and conscience won. How long do they need? Brentwood asked quietly. How long until your families are across the border into Canada? Tall Bear seemed taken aback by the question, as if he'd expected anything but this. 3 days, maybe 4, if the weather holds. But, Colonel, you would let them go? Your orders. Brentwood held up his hand. My orders were to move your people to the reservation. They say nothing about timing or methods. It will take me at least a week to file my report on this situation, gather proper forces, and mount an operation. Bureaucracy, you understand. Very slow sometimes. A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. By the time I'm ready to enforce those orders, I suspect I'll find only empty camps and cold trails. Jack felt tears burning behind his eyes, tears of relief and gratitude, and the sheer unexpected beauty of watching a good man choose right over easy. But Tall Bear wasn't finished. Colonel, there is something you must know. Tom Brennan and his vigilantes left Fort Russell angry. Our scouts have been watching them. They are gathering more men, planning to ride on our families while they travel north. They mean to attack within 2 days. Your week of bureaucracy will mean nothing if our people are slaughtered on the trail. The information changed everything. Brentwood's face hardened into the expression of a military strategist. How many men does Brennan have? One of the young warriors spoke up. 50, maybe 60, well armed. They plan to strike where the trail crosses Split Rock Creek. Brentwood turned to his lieutenant. Send riders immediately to Captain Morrison at the northern outpost. Tell him to take his full company and patrol the Split Rock Creek area for the next week. Tell him there has been credible intelligence about horse thieves operating in that region, and we need a strong military presence to discourage criminal activity. The lieutenant looked confused. Sir, there haven't been any reports of horse thieves. Brentwood's voice cut like ice. I'm giving you an order, Lieutenant. There are horse thieves in the Split Rock Creek area. I'm certain of it. Probably white thieves, probably armed and dangerous. Captain Morrison is to patrol that area and prevent any violence. Is that understood? Understanding dawned in the young officer's eyes. Yes, sir. Understood completely, sir. As the soldiers rode off to carry out their orders, Tall Bear studied Brentwood with new eyes. You are risking much for people you do not know, for a cause that is not your own. Brentwood shook his head slightly. No, I am doing what should have been done from the start, finding a solution that doesn't require good people to die for bad policy. Monroe here reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that following orders and doing right aren't always the same thing. The next hours were spent in detailed planning. The remaining warriors would stay at the camp for 3 more days, then slip away in small groups, making it appear they were still present while actually heading north. Brentwood would file reports indicating the Cheyenne were under observation and negotiation was ongoing. By the time anyone realized the truth, Tall Bear's people would be across the Canadian border, beyond the reach of U's authority. It wasn't perfect, and it couldn't be permanent, but it gave them a chance. As they prepared to leave, Little Wolf ran to Jack and wrapped his small arms around the cowboy's waist. Through Running Deer's translation, the boy said, "You are my brother now, Jack Monroe." In our way, that means forever. Wherever you go, whatever trouble you face, the Cheyenne remember. We will remember. Jack knelt down to meet the child's eyes. This small life he'd saved without thinking. This spark that had ignited something larger than himself. I'll remember too, Little Wolf. I'll remember that people are people, no matter what they look like or where they come from. And maybe that's the only lesson that really matters. 4 days later, scouts confirmed that Tall Bear's families had safely crossed into Canada. Captain Morrison's timely presence at Split Rock Creek had indeed discouraged Brennan's vigilantes from taking action. Brentwood filed his report stating that the Cheyenne in question had dispersed into small groups that couldn't be located in the vast territory, and that further pursuit would be inefficient use of military resources. The report was accepted with minimal questions. After all, everyone knew Indians were good at disappearing. Jack Monroe never returned to drifting. He settled on a small piece of land near the Canadian border, running a modest ranch that became known as a place where people of all backgrounds were welcome. Over the years, he occasionally received visitors, a warrior passing through with messages from Tall Bear, a family bringing gifts of thanks, a child grown into adulthood wanting to meet the man who had saved his grandfather. Each visit reminded Jack that one act of kindness, one moment of seeing another person's humanity, could ripple out in ways impossible to predict or measure.